Back to the 86th online episode of Peacetime, posted every Sunday morning by Peace Point with myself, Phra Nicholas Thanissaro, coming to you today from DIMC in Azusa, California. In the previous session, we looked at the Aggañña Sutta, and today we continue on our journey through an anthology of the important suttas from the Buddhist scriptures by looking at the Aggañña Sutta. I estimate today's session will run to about an hour and 10 minutes with a 30-minute break halfway through for some meditation. So as usual with our chosen sutta, we will work our way through the sequence of sources, sutta name meaning, interlocutors, place names and timing, backstory and overview, before looking at the main body of the manuscript itself, the outcomes of the teaching, and some of the issues the sutta raises. I should say up front that description of this sutta overlaps substantially with my session B002, which elaborated more than I will today on the topics of the original nature of human beings as goodness, the entropy of morality, factors affecting average human life expectancy, racial discrimination, unfathomable questions, and timescale. So for this session, I will be prioritizing issues particular to this sutta itself. And for other ramifications, you should look back at that earlier lecture. So if you come from a non-Buddhist background, you may be surprised that the Buddha very rarely dealt in unsubstantiated truth claims, especially the sort of topics which the Buddha himself referred to as unfathomable questions, or ajintaya, which are the sort of question to which you can't get satisfactory answers by conventional thinking. The message of the Buddha generally prioritizes that we do what we can with what we have in the here and now. And there's no point with wasting time philosophizing about where we came from, where we're going, where it all started, who was the first man on earth, and so on. But yet, in this Aggañña Sutta, we do have a description about something of primeval human history, a very ancient history of our past. So today's sutta is from the third volume of the longer discourses, hence it is referenced D380, and because it is the 27th discourse of the Digha Nikaya, it is referenced DN27. Today we're using Maurice Walsh's Wisdom Publications translation as our manuscript, and the Venerable Tachu's 1991 book, Kamnot Lok Le Manusya Chat, for interpretation. So to first explain the name of the sutta we are studying today, the word Aggañña is an adjective which means highest, foremost, original, or primeval. The word sutta means, of course, discourse. Therefore, the name of the sutta we are studying today is the discourse on the first things or foremost knowledge. Turning to the interlocutors in this sutta, and here we're looking at paragraph 1 of the manuscript. In the sutta, we have the Buddha talking to two newly ordained monks in his ranks. The Buddha is referred to in the manuscript as the Lord, the ascetic Gautama, the Tathagata, or the Blessed Lord. The first of the novices who was speaking to the Buddha was called Vaseta. Vaseta had come from a very rich family and had turned his back on a family net worth of 400 million when he renounced the world. He had previously been an expert in the three Vedas and had been the chief disciple of the Mahasala Brahmin Vulkarasati, but later accepted the Buddha as his teacher and entered the monastic community. The second novice was called Paratawacha, who had turned his back on an even greater family net worth of 450 million. He had formerly been a pupil of the Brahmin Arukta, but had later become a follower of the Buddha. The Aggañña Sutta was preached to these two novices when they were undergoing the probationary period prior to taking full monastic ordination. The Aggañña Sutta was preached at the Pubarama temple in a mansion called Migaramatoupasatha, built by Migara's mother, in other words Lady Visakha, at the cost of 90 million for the land and a further 90 million for the construction. The whole temple was located in a park outside the eastern gate of Savatthi. It was the Buddha's routine to spend his siesta at this building each day after having taken his meal at the house of Anathapindika. As for the mention of the Apasara Brahma, or radiant beings, this term is used to describe both the realm of existence and the category of divine beings called Apasara Brahmas in the Genesis account connected with this sutta. As with many of the suttas which we have looked at, sometimes the reason the sutta became famous is only incidental to the real reason it was given in the first place. The reason why the sutta is particularly well known is because it deals with our cosmological origins and background according to the Buddhist scriptures. It even puts Buddhism into a historical context, which, although for Buddhism is not a particularly big deal, but it is considered essential to other religions of the world, who consider divine interventions in history to justify their faith. So here we're looking at paragraph 3. By contrast, we find that the innocuous reason this talk was given wasn't to set up a competing theory of cosmology to use in debates with other religions, but actually to give encouragement to monks who had been shunned on account of their decision to ordain. Many of the monks who had joined the Buddhist monastic community were previously acquainted with other sets of religious beliefs. And even though they were ordained, they still carried some of those misconceptions with them. So here, and we are looking at paragraph 5, the first aspect of the background to the backstory of this sutta is the historical existence, justified by religious legend, of a caste system in India. As a result of this system, the new monks featured in this sutta had been shunned by their former friends and colleagues because Brahmins believed they were privileged by birthright. The Buddha mentions the 4 castes by name, although he puts warriors, his own former caste, in the top position, and says no caste is better than another because the goodness of a person depends on their deeds, not on their provenance. Many of the 4 castes can do evil deeds. So here we're looking at paragraph 6, just as they may also do good deeds. So here we're looking at paragraph 7, so no caste has a monopoly on good or evil deeds. Any member of any caste can become a monk, and it is the Dhamma they attain that defines their goodness. And here we're looking at paragraph 8. And in his defense, he said before he ordained, he was a prince, looked down upon as a vassal by King Basenti. But now as a fully enlightened monk, he is admired by the same king as a teacher. So here we're looking at paragraph 9. So instead of associating with their former births, monks from whatever caste should say, if asked, that they are the sons of the Buddha and born of the Dharma, created by the Dharma, and heir to the Dharma. And as we continue down the same paragraph, I should draw your attention to one of the few places in the Buddhist scriptures where the word Dhammakaya is used, which is to explain Tagatasa hetang vasetati vajanang Dhammakayo ititi, which translates as O Vasetas. The word Dhammakaya is indeed the name of the Tathagata. At the word Dhammakaya, the body of the Dharma, is indeed an epithet for the Buddha himself. I don't know how much you know about the ancient Indian caste system, so for the historical period we're talking about, which is known as the later Vedic, from 1000 to 600 BCE, and the second urbanization from 500 to 200 BCE. For those of you still unfamiliar, there were 4, maybe 5 castes, known either as Varna or Jati, and were also connected with the professions Gula allowable to each social sector. So according to the order Buddhists put them in, the first of the 4 official castes was the kingly, warrior, ruling or noble caste, in Sanskrit Kshatriyas or in Pali Khattiya. The second caste was comprised of Brahmins or priests, advisors or chaplains to the kings, in Pali Brahmana, who engaged themselves in priestly activities which mostly consisted of sacrifices in those days. This caste also included other ascetics and fire worshippers. The third caste was the hereditary merchants, known in Sanskrit as Vaishyas or in Pali as Vesas, who sold things. Store owners have capital, so they are better off than some. The fourth caste was the peasants, or people who did manual work, or laborers in other words, known in Sanskrit as Shudras or in Pali as Suttas. They were the ones who basically didn't have any capital. Lastly, outside the system were those who didn't have a caste to belong to, so often they are referred to as outcasts, known in Pali as Chandalas, or in Sanskrit with the same pronunciation but spelled with a CH instead of a C. Later they became known as untouchables, especially the Dalit community. Even down to the present day in India, even though the caste system has been outlawed, but it still has a very powerful hold over the consciousness of the Indian subcontinent. Caste-related prohibitions of the ancient times meant that you couldn't marry someone, eat from the same plate as, or drink from the same water pump as someone outside your caste. In the present day, these sort of taboos continue to a greater or lesser extent. You can't just make them go away by changing the laws. When Buddhism emerged in India, the Buddha took a stand against the caste system. He maintained that no matter what caste you came from, if you do the footwork, you have an equal chance of becoming enlightened. So, into the ranks of the monastic community, he accepted young men from all four castes, and even from the untouchables. He said that his teaching was like the ocean, but all the castes from which the people came to him were like rivers flowing into the sea. So in the Paharata Sutta of the Anguttara Nikaya, the Buddha says, just as the mighty rivers like the Ganges and Yamuna, on reaching the great ocean, lose their former names and designations, and are just reckoned as seawater, even so when members of the four castes, warriors, Brahmins, merchants, and laborers renounce the home life to become monks, under this teaching and discipline proclaimed by the Buddha, they lose their former names and lineage, and are reckoned only as the sons of the Sakyans, or in Pali language, Samana Sakya Bhutiya. According to the Udana Sutta, the Buddha described the unifying nature of his teaching and discipline, Bhikkhave Samma Samutto Ekaraso Lonaraso Evameva Ko Bhikkhave Ayang Mamavinayo Ekaraso Vimutiraso, which translates as, just as the ocean has one taste, the taste of salt, even so this teaching and training has one taste too, the taste of liberation. So the Buddhist monkhood was the great equalizer, and any prejudices which had previously existed between the members of the different castes should be abandoned on entering the monkhood. So here we're skipping back to paragraph 4, but ignoring caste prejudices was not so easy for the two former Brahmins, Vaseta and Paratavacha. Once they had become monks, they were shunned by their former kinsmen who had not become monks, who accused them, "You let us down. It's beneath your dignity to be mixing with these people from other castes. Didn't you know that we were born superior?" Brahmin society took as its scriptural authority the Purusha Suktang or Purusha hymn of the Rig Veda, which stated that if you are from the warrior caste, you originated from the head of the Brahma or creator god. If you are a priest, you came from the mouth of the creator god. If you were a merchant, you came from the hands of the creator god. And if you're a laborer, you came from the feet of the creator god. So this creation myth was deeply ingrained in the self-understanding of many of the monks who were joining the ranks of Buddhist monasticism. And because these two particular monks were feeling rather disgruntled about their decision to become monks, the Buddha gave them the sutta as a sort of pep talk to explain what their true origins really were, so they could get on with their practice better and they could forget about all the prejudices in their past. So to change the narrative in an indirect way, the Buddha ended up explaining where human beings truly came from, but not to create a philosophy for people to debate about, but simply to give encouragement to these monks who were burdened under the weight of their former beliefs. So this is the backstory to this sutta. To get an overview of the sutta's teachings requires an understanding of the time-bending Buddhist perspective of the historical timescales. So, the second thing we need to understand before we embark on the sutta itself is the cosmological timescale described in the Aggañña Sutta. In the next paragraph of the manuscript, we meet up with the euphemistic terms contraction and a long time. which are misleading without a proper explanation. So, what we are going to see described in the sutta is a gradual downturn in the quality of life from very high-minded ethereal beings, depending on the joy of meditation, deteriorating down with the environment to those who are very much like the human beings in the present day, who can't even manage to keep the 5 precepts properly anymore. According to the Buddhist understanding, humans live in a vast cycle of evolution and entropy of the whole cosmic system, which according to the Kappa Sutta of the Anguttara Nikaya is a cycle that has 4 stages: decline, depression, development, and a golden age. I'm not going to describe all 4 segments in detail today. If you're interested, you should look back at session 2 or B002 of the Buddhist Concept series. For this sutta, we will only be looking at the start of the world cycle. So what a world cycle means is that the human realm comes into existence, stays for a while, and then decays. The place in the cycle in any era is attributed to the quality of mind of those alive at the time. Life on Earth comes from beings reborn from previous world cycles who have survived as a result of their high quality of mind. So let's start with the top of the slope of the period of decline, or as it's known in Pali language, Samvatati Asankaya Kappa. The Aggañña Sutta describes primeval times at the top of the slope of the period of decline in a way that shows the connection between mind, lifestyle, and environment. If we skip ahead to where we are in the present day, around the middle of the slope of decline, we have come to a time where human beings are characterized by clear gender attributes, reasonably large degrees of defilements in the mind, social disharmony and plurality within limits of legality, and widespread ignorance of meditation. 5 precepts are kept by only a few, sexual desires are encouraged and celebrated, lifespan is only 75 years, and we have medium body size. Are there any historical records of former times when humans were supposedly bigger and more long-lived? Although there have been some hoaxes, some genuine discoveries of outsized human skeletons do exist in the North American fossil records. What you see in the slide is a very large human femur, basically in comparison to a human of regular height in the present day. So how about that for a giant? A human femur of this sort of size meant that there were human beings around, which were 4 or 5 meters tall at some time in our human history. But usually evolutionists tend to regard such fossils as quirks or outliers, which fail to be properly explained by scientists who don't want to rewrite all the grade school biology textbooks. The gaps in the fossil record are overlooked, and any bones that don't fit in the sequence from simple to complex are assumed to be anomalies or outliers. So to give a well-known example, the slide shows the Biloxi River trackways in Texas, where fossilized human footprints are found in the same rock strata as footprints of dinosaurs, meaning both sets of footprints are contemporary. But the explanation from the Aggañña Sutta comes from a time which was much earlier than dinosaurs, because there's been a downturn in the quality of life rather than an evolutionary advancement, and it goes in cycles. So to recap very briefly, this sutta's context is that 2 novice monks, Paseta and Bharatavacha, were originally from the Brahmin caste, but converted to Buddhism and were shunned by their former caste members. The Buddha claims the Brahmins have forgotten their past and offers an alternative to the Brahmin myth of creation, which debunks the caste system through portraying the first people on earth as fallen celestial leftovers from a previous world cycle. So having set ourselves up with the backstory before we embark on the manuscript proper, let's take a break halfway and settle ourselves for 30 minutes of meditation, which today is a recent recording of a meditation entitled The Master Nun Who Founded the Dhamma Temple. If at this time you would like to find a comfortable sitting position for yourself as you listen to my guidance. I'd like to start by making sure you're comfortable for your meditation practice. settling yourself into a comfortable posture for the meditation. Whether you're sitting on a meditation mat or on a straight-backed chair. So if you're sitting cross-legged, then try to make sure that both your knees reach as far as the floor. Perhaps propping up your position with smaller cushions to achieve that stable triangle of support. If you're sitting on a chair, then sit up straight with both your feet flat on the floor. In any case, you should bring your spine up nice and tall in order to energize yourself, letting your lower back relax to its natural shape and allowing your hands to rest palm upwards in your lap, with the right hand over the left hand, the index finger of the right hand touching against the thumb of the left hand. And close your eyes very gently. Close your eyes gently or just cast your gaze softly downward to the floor in front of you, allowing your eyes to defocus. You might imagine that as you breathe out, you're letting go of any confusion in your life. And as you breathe in, you're inhaling clarity. As you breathe out, you're exhaling any darkness. And as you breathe in, you're inhaling light. As you breathe out, letting go of any hatred. And as you breathe in, inhaling love. Exhaling any anxiety, and inhaling nothing but peace and kindness and forgiveness, so that you're letting go of any shortcomings and gaining only strength through your meditation. And from there we do what's known as a body scan, to relax all the muscles of our body. So we invite a sense of relaxation to our face, allowing our eyelids to soften, allowing that softness to flow down through our temples in a gentle wave, allowing our lips to touch only very lightly together as our mouth relaxes, and letting our jawline soften. We relax our neck and let our shoulders drop to their natural height, releasing any tension in our arms, our forearms, our hands and fingers, so that our hands rest only very lightly in our lap. Continuing on down, we relax all the muscles of our torso, chest, trunk, and throughout our core, before relaxing both legs, all the way down to our feet and our toes. And if there's any part of our body that still feels constricted or tight, we allow those areas to relax more completely. Meanwhile, we feel ourselves opening up and expanding, becoming lighter as we let go of any tension until it feels as if our whole body has melted away into the atmosphere around us, leaving us with no further worries about our body anymore, allowing us to turn our attention toward the inside of our body. So we allow our attention to gently peel away from the outside world, this time allowing us to relax our state of mind by putting aside any worries or concerns about everyday life. Almost like a person with no past and no future, entirely focused in the present moment and on the task in hand. We might imagine that our mind is like a clear blue sky, where the thoughts are just like white, fluffy clouds floating on by. We might feel as if our body and mind were sinking deeper and deeper, letting go and unwinding with each exhalation, allowing our mind to withdraw from the tangled mesh of everyday life, leaving behind any anxiety or worries about our obligations or responsibilities, allowing ourselves to go to a place where we can be completely free and relaxed, completely at peace. And for us, that place might be like a sunny beach or a grassy meadow, a majestic mountaintop, or a favorite room. Conjuring up such a place in our mind's eye, our ideal spot for relaxation, with no cares or worries, as if we're completely free from the usual round of daily hassles or pressure. And we take in a sense of wholeness, the feeling of space, sensing the infinite, boundlessly outward, extending forever. And we take this expanse fully into ourselves, letting go of our boundaries, connecting for a moment with the wonder of remaining fully in the here and now, letting go of the boundaries as we connect with a wider reality, beyond what we can normally see, extending wider than our conventional imagination. And when we feel relaxed and refreshed, both in body and in mind, very gently and using no effort at all, we can imagine that the whole of our body is nothing but an empty space or a hollow cavity, with no organs or tissues, no muscles or bones. Or inside you, you might imagine that your whole body has been transformed into a sort of transparent bubble with nothing on the inside. And when you're ready, again, very gently, using no effort at all, you might cast your mind back again to that imaginary picture of a bright, shining sun, which we imagined a few moments ago, maybe yellow or golden in color, white or red, it doesn't really matter. And we shouldn't feel put off if the actual picture is not as clear as we normally see it with our eyes. Even if it's vague, we accept it anyway. And there may be some people who find the warmth of the sun is more tangible than the actual picture of it. And again, we can use that tactile sense of warmth as the object for our meditation. In this case, we allow that bright picture or that feeling of warmth to make its way gradually downwards inside the space of our body, almost as if we were gradually breathing it down inside us to the deepest point of the breath, or gently swallowing the object down to the very pit of our stomach. And once the bright object or the sense of warmth reaches that point in our abdomen, there's no need for us to move the object anywhere else anymore. We gradually and gently maintain it with a feather-light touch at the very center of ourselves. And if we find our awareness wandering away onto other things, whether it be the sounds or distractions around us, each time we realize, we simply bring our attention back again to the center of our body as before. If the inner object disappears, then we can conjure up a new one, and we don't make a big deal about it. And when we're new to meditation, we'll find that our mind wanders quite often. But each time we notice its absence, we simply bring it back, and it'll become a little bit easier to keep it in place the next time round. Until before long, we'll find our awareness is spending more time centered than it does wandering. At which point we'll start to have an intuitive feeling of the mind being able to stay at the center of the body almost by second nature, and to help create a space between ourselves and our thoughts. We start to tap into that still, small and silent space between the thoughts. And if the thoughts return, we do our best to ignore them. But if ignoring the thoughts proves ineffective, we can make use of the traditional mantra instead, using the words Samma Arahang, Samma Arahang, Samma Arahang, or any other affirmation of our own that we prefer to substitute in. And the more you repeat the mantra, the deeper those words will lead us towards a sense of purity in the mind, helping us to free the mind of thought as those words resonate within our heart, within every cell, every fiber of our being, as the mind becomes more settled within us. So we continue in this way, lightly and gently, just for a few more moments now in silence, until we come to the appropriate time. We continue to keep our mind gently on track at the center of the body the whole of the time by means of our inner object, whether it's something we see or something we feel inside us. And if we find our mind is slipping away onto other things, each time we realize, we just bring our attention back again to the center of the body as before. If the inner object disappears, we can conjure up a new one. But if it changes, then we just follow it in its new form. At the same time, we try to keep the mind free of thought, either by ignoring any thoughts that arise, or by making use of the mantra as a way to run interference on those random thoughts. So we continue to meditate in this way, lightly and gently at the center of our body. And today, as we're meditating, we can bring to mind the meditation journey of the second generation root teacher of our tradition, the Master Nun Kunyai Maharatana Upasika Changanobjung, or Kunyai as we call her for short, who lived between 1909 and the year 2000. She is often revered by our meditators as a model of excellence in meditation that allowed her to break through the glass ceiling of a monastic tradition usually dominated by males and scholars. She came originally from a landed farming community in Nakhon Pathom in Thailand, and was inspired to learn meditation from an early age by the wish to offer spiritual help to her father, who'd passed away prematurely when she was still young. She left behind the comfort of her reasonably wealthy provincial home and humbled herself by engaging in domestic service in the Thai capital in order to get the connection she needed to continue her spiritual education at the temple of her choice. Kun Yai's first contact with the meditation teacher Thong Suk Samdeng Pan was when her mistress, Punai Liep, trusted her enough to join a family meditation lesson held in their home. As a servant, she had to work even harder than normal to gain this privilege. And Thong Suk's usual way of teaching meditation was to have her students focus their mind gently at the center of the body, visualizing a crystal ball while repeating the mantra Samma Arahang silently inside themselves. Even these simple instructions at first seemed quite difficult for Kun Yai to follow. Whenever she closed her eyes and wanted to let go of the things of the world, suddenly she'd find her mind filled with thoughts of work she hadn't completed, and she would peek at her mistress to make sure she wouldn't be caught neglecting her domestic duties. Sometimes there would be thoughts of the family she'd left behind, or images of the open fields of her hometown that bothered her during the meditation. But her meditation teacher explained that thought is the greatest hindrance to meditation, and consequently, even outside her meditation lessons, Kun Yai divided her time strictly, trying to finish her chores more quickly each day so she could sneak in extra time to meditate. She would slip meditation into the gaps between her household duties. But it was hard for her to settle the mind when she was constantly having to look over her shoulder when meditating. Even so, when she got to close her eyes and meditate, she did so in earnest, cultivating concentration at the center of the body, determined to see the crystal ball for herself. If she meditated too seriously, and it brought on a headache or feelings of dizziness, then she learned to avoid the sort of effort that makes it uncomfortable to breathe. But still she found her mind did not reach the point where her thoughts had died down into silence. Still she could see nothing but darkness in her meditation. And this seemed to go on for weeks and months, without any glimpse of the inner light her teacher had promised. Thong Suk advised her always to keep her mind in peace by means of the visualization and a mantra, saying not to worry if she wasn't an overnight success, and to avoid using force on the mind, never squeezing the eyes closed, not to be afraid of seeing nothing, and even if there was something to see, not to get elated about it, otherwise the newfound inner image would disappear again. But eventually her teacher Thong Suk was able to confirm that Kun Yai's mind was starting to become refined, and when it became yet more stable, it would reach a standstill on its own. Her experience of meditation made Kun Yai think of trying to catch a hen in a chicken coop, because if you rush to catch a hen, then it will just fly away and all your efforts will be in vain. But if you're able to approach the chicken gently, then it will become tame and easily caught. In the same way, it's impossible to control the mind by force, but only by slow and careful application of the attention, irrespective of whether we can see the inner object clearly or not, until in the end the mind will come to a standstill at the point of balance. So in this way, she continued to maintain the concentration with mindfulness, both inside and outside the practice, until eventually, after 2 years, she was able to reduce the number of thoughts in the mind, leaving herself with a feeling of lightness and spaciousness inside. On one occasion, she was able to perceive a tiny pinhole of light inside herself, rather like a star in the sky, at which point she was able to bring her mind to a stage of progress known as a standstill within a standstill, where the mind is able to penetrate through the center, going continually deeper on a central axis within, at which point a bright crystal sphere became firmly established at the center of the body, staying with her even between meditations, till eventually she was able to pass the awareness through the very center of the crystal ball, to see the astral version of herself, and eventually a succession of inner bodies of increasing refinement, until she was able to reach the body of enlightenment within herself. And it was at this point that both Kunyai and her teacher Tongsuk made a pact to renounce the household life and enter the temple as nuns. And on the night of entering the temple, she had a dream about crossing over a great ocean to an island where a huge Bodhi tree stood. Not long afterwards, she got the chance to learn meditation from the great abbot of Wat Phat Nam. He greeted her with the words, "What took you so long?" even though he had never met her before. Later, he fast-tracked her progress into a meditation research facility in his temple. The great abbot was a hard taskmaster and never usually spared any compliments for his meditation students. Nonetheless, the unequaled prowess shown by Kunyai in answering his questions through her lucid meditation earned her the praise of second to none from the great abbot. She used to meditate for 2 6-hour sessions every day over the course of decades in conducting that meditation research, and although she never received any formal education and remained illiterate throughout her life, never expecting recognition, but it was her efforts to defend Bangkok from the air raids during the Second World War that made her a household name when this was described in a journal called Vipassana Banteng San. Eventually she outlived both the great abbot of Wat Phat Nam and her teacher Tongsuk, and she started to engage with a new generation of meditators at Dhamma House, leading to the foundation of Wat Phat Makaya in Pathum Thani province from 1970 onwards, which is why Kunyai is known as the founder of our main temple in Thailand down to the present day. So we reflect on the roots of our own tradition in this way, as we continue to apply our mind lightly and gently at the center of the body, following on with our own practice for a few more moments in silence, until we come to time for some loving kindness meditation. So we continue to keep our mind on track at the center of the body the whole of the time, lightly, gently, continuously, always at the center of whatever inner experience we have built up for ourselves as a result of the meditation so far today. We allow ourselves an extra measure of loving kindness to spread out towards every part of our body, with the wish that it will help us overcome difficulty of every kind. Checking in with the part of ourselves that equates with peace and harmony, rather than conflict or attrition. Filling ourselves with love, making sure that every cell is open to that love, and taking a moment to purify and cleanse our body and mind in a way that feels right for us, as if there's nothing that love cannot conquer, as if there's nothing that love cannot heal. And in the same way, reaching out to all the people and beings around us with that same experience of loving kindness from our center, but reaching out to all the inhabitants of the world, even to those with whom we might not see eye to eye, and extending outwards to all those individuals the sense of love and understanding and healing light, with a powerful, cleansing, healing light, extending for the benefit of all our parents and siblings, our friends, our children, our life partner, our in-laws, uncles and aunts, nieces and nephews, cousins, teachers, those in public office, extending towards them all a powerful cleansing light to all living beings near and far. And as this healing energy grows and expands, to fill this whole room, to fill this whole building, outwards to the whole city, the whole of our county, the whole country, reaching out to all living beings with a sense of blessing, auspiciousness for all. With this healing energy, where the spreading of loving kindness is almost like a tangible expression of a wish or a hope for a wider society of elevated awareness, extending outwards around the world with the inner knowledge of meditation, to make a real change for the good on a different wavelength in the world, as if our own meditation somehow ushers in a broader change in the world, a sense of transformation that starts with ourselves. We might even think back to the Master Nun Kunyai, who founded our original temple in Thailand, with a sense of gratitude, extending positive energy as we continue to bring this meditation lineage to a new generation for the last few moments of our practice together. Sappa Buddhanupavena, Sappa Dhammanupavena, Sappa Sanghanupavena Sattha Soti Bhavantu. So if you'd like to come to the end of your meditation for today, you can gradually open your eyes again. If you feel at all uncomfortable, then slowly try changing to a more comfortable position before gently finishing your practice. So returning gently to our subject matter of the Aggañña Sutta for today, we turn now to look at the main body of the sutta. The manuscript which we have before us tells us about a time in very ancient history. Before I go on, I might mention that you can take this as a legend if you like, or you can take it as a historical account, because it can't be denied that even scientifically acceptable evidence for times so deep in history would be pretty tenuous anyway. So normally when we talk about ancient history, we immediately expect fossil evidence. However, fossil records are much too recent for what we're talking about. The sort of geological or cosmological timescales we're talking about here are history which goes back beyond the emergence of our own planet. So you don't need to go looking for fossil proof because even the rock strata where the fossils would have been laid down wasn't there yet. So we're talking about something which the Buddha would have learned from his own meditation rather than looking at rock core samples. So here we're looking at paragraph 10, which starts with the words, "There comes a time, Vaseta, when sooner or later, after a long period, this world contracts. At a time of contraction, beings are mostly born in the Apasara Brahma world." So as I have explained, what is implied by the term contraction is a historical period when the universe was in a very different state than it is in the present day. You can say that it is a time between world cycles, when there was not yet any life on our planet Earth. The beings we are talking about may have had an appearance rather similar to this artist's impression, so basically they had ethereal bodies rather than a physical one. They were self-luminous, and in fact the light inside those beings was the only light in the entire universe at the time, because there was no sun or moon or stars day or night. So the only light in the universe came from these luminous beings wafting around. They didn't need to eat anything because they were nourished by their own happiness, which had arisen from all the meditation they'd done in their previous lifetime as human beings. They had very long life expectancies. They had no gender identifiers because they had transcended sexual matters. And as they wafted around, they came across the newly formed Earth, which, perhaps as you can imagine, was rather like a loaf of bread that had recently come out of the oven, with a very appetizing aroma to it. So here we're looking at paragraph 11, and on the waters covering the surface of the Earth was floating something referred to as curds of earth, although the manuscript uses the term savory earth. Now, those Apasara Brahmas didn't really need to eat anything, but they were tempted by the tasty smell of the curds of earth floating on the surface of the waters. And one of them couldn't resist the temptation to stoop down, pick up some of the curds of earth and taste it. And what happened was, as a result of this giving into temptation, this unwarranted greed on behalf of one particular Apasara Brahma, was that the development of the whole of the universe was set in motion. Why? Because those beings' quality of mind had diminished by a certain amount. So the environment started to change, not because of some creator being, but because of the downturn in the quality of mind of the Apasara Brahmas inhabiting that environment. Here we're looking at paragraph 12. So this incident is a very concrete example of the first verses of the Dhammapada that the mind is the leader of all things. The mind is always the chief, the prime mover. Because as the quality of mind diminished, the whole series of changes came about, not only for that particular being, but for the whole environment, because Buddhists make connections between state of mind and state of life and the state of the environment. So this being gives into their own unwarranted greed and starts to taste physical food from the surface of the earth. And as a result of that, there is a chain reaction set up in the universe by which night and day starts, by which the stars, moon, and sun appear, not because of some creator, but because of the actions of some particular being who succumbed to their own temptations, thereby reducing the quality of their own mind. This being was not alone, but was imitated by all the others in the same group of Apasara Brahmas. They too started to chase the curds floating on the surface of the water until there was no such curds left anymore. So here we're looking at paragraph 13. With the disappearance of the curds of earth, then some very distinct changes start to happen within the bodies of those Apasara Brahmas. Where before they had been quite self-luminous, the ones that had eaten more of the curds of earth became relatively darker in their complexion. And the second major impurity started to occur in the minds of those beings, which was that those with a brighter complexion looked down on the ones which had a darker complexion. And here we're looking at paragraph 14. So from the initial impurity in the mind of succumbing to temptation, a second impurity was added to that, which was the impurity of basically racial discrimination, or at least discrimination on the basis of appearance. Consequently, because of the discrimination in the mind, quality of the environment started to deteriorate further, so that the staple food available to those beings became coarser than it had been before. You might think that eating earth is a pretty desperate way of surviving, but on the contrary, that earth was like a superfood that contained all the nutrients necessary for a person to support themselves. Now, instead of these curds of earth being available, what was left was something more like mushrooms, although this manuscript calls it fungus, which still provided all the nutrition necessary. Later, alongside the arrogance or conceit of racial discrimination, those who had eaten increasing amounts of this coarse food found that their bodies got weighed down by the food digesting inside them, so they were no longer able to fly away from the earth, even if they wanted to. So here we're looking at paragraph 15. As a result of the being's greed and discrimination, the environment deteriorated further, so that even the mushrooms disappeared, and what was left was something more like creepers on the ground. These creepers were more fibrous than the curds of earth or the mushrooms and needed digestion. As a food, it couldn't be absorbed directly by the body anymore, but needed some sort of digestive tract within their body. So some sort of intestines or a gut developed. With the development of a digestive tract came the gender features of those beings as well, because if you have a digestive tract, then you need to have gender features too. So we're looking at paragraph 16, and it turned out that not all the beings presented the same because they varied in the strictness with which they had kept the third precept in former lives. Those who had been less strict presented as female, while those who had been stricter presented as male. So here we've moved on to the second part of paragraph 16, and what we see is that there were two different sorts of beings now in the community. Normally you would think that the males would shun those with female features, but some in society were actually attracted by the differences between the genders, and some of them started to mess around with those of the other gender. In a society which previously had valued the practice of celibacy, this was seen as shameful behavior. So here we're looking at paragraph 17. Those paired of couples had to find a place to hide themselves away to do their dirty deeds together. And when they couldn't find somewhere private, they had started to build dwellings in order to have the privacy to have sexual relations. There's a tradition in the present day for weddings where confetti or popcorn for millennials is thrown upon the newlywed couple. And in this particular sutta, it says that that tradition is much more ancient than we might have imagined, because it wasn't confetti which was thrown over the couple in ancient times, but it was clods of earth and sticks, which was thrown at the couples to banish them from the community. So the couples settled down in houses and no longer led a nomadic existence. They were tied down to a particular plot of land and no longer were able to keep the 8 precepts anymore, so they settled on keeping merely 5 precepts. So in those days, husband and wife would have been faithful to one another, and they would have survived off the land surrounding their own house. Sexual reproduction became the norm, However, since the level of precepts of the people in society had diminished from 8 down into 5 precepts, the environment changed accordingly. The nature of the staple food deteriorated from superfood creepers to a sort of rice. Rice in those days was harvested in huge grains. Someone once showed me the grains of rice available in that day and age, and one grain was the size of a whole jackfruit or an American football, not the tiny grains like we have today. Another special feature of the rice grains in those days was that if you picked one, by the next morning it would have been replaced by a new grain of rice with no visible scar to show where the old one had been. In those days, people had a leisurely way of life. Each day, however much they needed to eat, then they would just wander a short distance from their house and pick it. They would pick just what they needed for the day. So here we're looking at the tail end of paragraph 17. Later, however, some lazy individuals hoarded enough to tide them over for a couple of days, so they could spend more time lying around. So, as the impurities of laziness started to take root in the minds of these people, the environment and its available staple food deteriorated further to become the sort of rice which had a husk around it. Now, unlike the old form of rice, if you broke a grain off from the stem, it would leave a scar, and you couldn't be sure whether the next day there would be a new grain growing up to replace it. So the food growing within a person's territory might not be sufficient for them. So here we're looking at paragraph 18. Eventually, the level of morality in society declined further still, and there started to be troublemakers who would climb the fence into their neighbor's plot to steal rice from there. So here we're looking at paragraph 19. Even when they were caught red-handed, they would brazenly tell the lie that they didn't do it. So instead of keeping 5 precepts, they had stooped to telling lies and stealing. So you can see that from the original transcendental beings, which were able to strictly uphold 8 precepts, the morality in society gradually diminished to 5 precepts, and then further to a point where less than 5 precepts was the norm for society. And here we're looking at paragraph 20. So it came to the point where they had to elect a representative from their community who, in return for a share of their rice, would have the job of meting out justice to those in society that broke the rules. Here we're looking at paragraph 21. This first king was called Dhamma, or basically the one who had been elected to make decisions on behalf of the community, which the Buddha explained was the origin of the warrior or Khattiya caste. So here we're looking at paragraph 22. The Buddha went on to explain the origin of all the other castes in a similar way, saying that the ones who chose to withdraw from that increasingly corrupt society, who went to meditate in leaf huts in the forest, was the start of the so-called ones who meditate, or Jayaka, which was the origin of the Brahmin ascetics. So here we're looking at paragraph 23. The ones who were not able to meditate, but who liked to compile and recite scriptures, became known as the ones who did not meditate, or Ajayaka, which is the origin of the non-meditators, in other words, the majority of the Brahmin caste. Today we're looking at paragraph 24. Those who were not meditators or Brahmins, who were married couples, adopted various trades and were the origin of the merchant or Vesa caste. So here we're looking at paragraph 25. Those who remained took up non-merchant trades, which mostly meant manual work, but also included hunting, which is the origin of the laborer or Sutta caste. So here we're looking at paragraph 26, and it turned out that ascetics originated from all the 4 castes who renounced their former vocations, so they became ascetics through choice, not heritage. So here we're looking at paragraph 27, and it turned out that no matter what caste they belonged to, if they had mostly done bad deeds during their life, then they went to hell realms when they died. And looking at paragraph 28, no matter what caste they belonged to, if they had done mostly good deeds during their life, then they went to the heaven realms when they died. So here we're looking at paragraph 29, and no matter what caste they belonged to, if they'd done a mixture of good and bad deeds during their life, they experienced a mixture of pleasure and pain in their afterlife. And looking at paragraph 30, no matter what caste they belong to, if they meditated to the point they developed the certain requisites of enlightenment, they attained the parinirvana at the end of their life. So according to the Buddha's explanation of the origin of the castes, the warrior caste was originally elected judge in situations of crime or grievance. The priestly caste came from either those who withdrew to the forest to meditate or those who became reciters of texts. Merchant caste came from those who got married and adopted various mercantile trades. The worker caste came from those who had no trade but took up hunting. And the Buddha concluded that it makes no difference which caste you came from. If you develop the requisites of enlightenment, you can attain parinirvana in this life. So in this way, the Buddha concluded to Vaseta and Bharatavacha that those who come to the monkhood can attain nirvana irrespective of caste. So to describe the outcome of the teaching, and here we're looking at paragraph 32, at the conclusion of the preaching of the Aggañña Sutta, Vaseta and Bharatavacha were delighted and rejoiced in the Buddha's words. And the commentary tells us that later, meditating on the teachings they had heard, both Vaseta and Bharatavacha attained arahantship and were granted the higher ordination. So in conclusion, the issues raised by the Aggañña Sutta, and here I'll emphasize the points I've not already talked about in the B002 lecture, include 5 main points, namely that human virtue is interconnected with the environment, that deus ex machina is superfluous to the explanation of cosmic history, that the ability to keep precepts is responsible for the welfare of society, on the origins of vegetarianism and eating meat, and that birthright is not a thing, but the good and bad deeds a person chooses. So, on the first point about human virtue and the environment, with this sutta we have discovered the connection between the collective karma of the people living in society and the quality of the environment they get to live in. So, human society gets the environment it deserves, basically. It's not that in Buddhism we can't be bothered to care for the environment, although you may doubt this assertion if you live in Thailand long enough and see what people do to the environment there. But Buddhists believe that the real way to improve the environment is to improve the people that live in it, because that's the root cause of the quality of the environment. All we see as damage to the environment or climate change more generally is that basically it's just a reflection on the mental states of the people who live in that environment. So if we are exploiting the environment to the point that the rainforests are being cut down and there's global warming, then the way to really solve the problem is not to plant more forests, but rather to deal with the mentality of people who are so obsessed with their profit margin that they find this sort of destruction acceptable. So we ought to be changing people's hearts and minds rather than merely cleaning up after the symptoms of environmental destruction. Secondly, there's no need for some mysterious God to explain Genesis, because any God in this description of origins is redundant. From the Buddha's discourse, merely the mental states and the qualities of mind of the people living in the environment is enough to explain all the logical relations involved. You don't need some deus ex machina to explain why this has happened. So what is the operant thing changing the destiny of human society? It's not some eye in the sky or some old guy with a beard sitting on a cloud somewhere, but it's the very choices of the people in the society which changes the environment and changes the way of life, changes the staple food available to the people there, changes the life expectancy, and basically affects the whole well-being of people in society as a whole. So if you feel compelled to ask about cosmic origins, the Buddhist answer is not a creator God, but the defilements and choices coming from people's minds. Thirdly, this sutta points the finger very clearly at the individuals in society and the precepts they keep as being what drives the welfare of that society. So if you want to blame quality of life on government policy, you're pointing the finger at the wrong person. Instead, you need to be pointing the finger back at yourself and at your fellow man in society, because that is where the well-being of society comes from. It's just the same as if you were to build a skyscraper. It's not just down to the design, you have to look at the quality of the raw materials making up the structure. Although we may see 5 precepts as being contrived or perhaps something made up by the Buddha, but what we find from this sutta is that 5 precepts were around long before the Buddha or even before Buddhism, because they're borrowed from the experience of those people in the distant past we realize that they are the minimum set of proper behaviors which manage to stave off the deterioration which would otherwise happen in society. If members of society can uphold a minimum of 5 precepts, then they draw a line beneath which the quality of society won't slip any further. So nowadays, just as in those days of old, if you want society to continue to be habitable, then you need to uphold 5 precepts at the very minimum. The fourth point touches on the thorny issue of vegetarianism. I commonly get asked the question, if everyone keeps 5 precepts, who's going to run the meat market? How are we going to have enough protein in our diet? As if eating meat is the natural state of existence of human beings. What we learn again from the Aggañña Sutta is that eating meat is in fact a pretty sort of rough and ready way of eking out your existence. If society had more merit and more precepts, then there'd be much better food sources around in the environment to sustain ourselves without having to go around killing other animals in order to get enough protein to survive on. So we see that in the beginning, there wasn't a question about vegetarianism or meat eating because the quality of food available in the environment for beings of a much higher-minded nature was seriously more superior than food in the present day. So if people were to keep 5 precepts, then the food and the environment provided for them would automatically be of a much better quality. So you don't need to worry about who's going to be the butcher or about your protein supplements. Lastly, the most important thing we learn from this sutta is that all the claims of privilege based on the birthright in the world, such as the caste system, but also various more contemporary socially constructed systems like hereditary titles, aristocracy, race, ableism, or gender, are all a fiction according to Buddhism. And the important thing is not how or in what state we got here, but where we're going at the end of our life, which depends on our choices and actions while we're still in this world. So we should not buy into the myth of automatic human progress or entitlement to it. What we're trying to do by practicing our meditation, by doing good deeds, by keeping our precepts, is to try to get back to our original nature, to recover that original transcendental human state of mind and maybe go even beyond that. If we can do this, of course, it's going to be of benefit for ourselves, because we don't need to go through all the hardship of living in a day and age where society is becoming more and more like a dumpster fire. But beyond that, we find that on a collective level, if enough people make the effort to develop their state of mind, then far from us being the victims to the downfall of society which we see in this world cycle, we do have the possibility of actually slowing down this moral entropy or even freezing it to make sure that society doesn't slip any further, or maybe even to turn things around for the better. So what we see in this world cycle is what would happen if no one goes out of their way to make any special effort. But if we can make that special effort, and in society there is a resurgence of interest in cultivating quality of mind, then we can change the collective vibration for the whole of society to ensure an upturn of quality of mind, lifespan, and also quality of mind for society at large. So today we have all been looking at the Aggañña Sutta. For my next live session online, which will, fingers crossed, be a week on Sunday morning, we'll move on to look at the Satipatthana Sutta, which is a teaching about the 4 foundations of mindfulness. So for good measure, I'd like to remind viewers that you can email your questions about meditation or what you've learned in this lecture to the email address that you can see spelled out in the slide, and I will do my best to answer these on my next session. In the meantime, try to avoid recklessness or complacency as we continue to deal with the knock-on health and economic effects of the pandemic. Maintain a positive mood, speak only positive words, forgive others, extend good wishes to others, and meditate daily. Hopefully, as a result of today's session, you will be less easily taken in by claims of hereditary privilege and focus instead on carving out a bright future for yourself with diligence. So this is me, Phra Nicholas Thanissaro, signing off for now. So long, folks, and stay safe.